If I told you I grew up in an orphanage, and today I stand here as a man who helps others find hope, would you believe me? Maybe not. But if you listen to my story, you might start believing in second chances again. My name is Daniel Brooks, and this is how a boy who waited by the window for 12 years learned that sometimes the people we wait for never come back because we're meant to become them for someone else. I was 6 when my mother left me at St. Mary's Orphanage in Ohio. She told me it was just for a while, that she'd come back after getting things right. She hugged me tight, the kind of hug that makes you think nothing bad can ever happen. And then she walked away. That was the last time I saw her. The orphanage was a small, quiet building with squeaky floors and pale yellow walls. The air always smelled like dust and soap. The caretakers were kind, but it wasn't the same. Every night, I'd sit by the big window in the hallway, watching cars pass by under the streetlights, waiting for a face that never came. Some nights, I'd fall asleep on the cold floor, dreaming of her knocking on that door, smiling, saying I'm home. But mornings always broke the same way. The sound of bells, breakfast trays, and another day without her. Years went by like that. New kids came, old ones got adopted, but I stayed, the boy who wouldn't stop waiting. The other kids used to tease me. They said, "Danny, your mom forgot you." I'd smile, but inside, something broke a little more each time. One day, I asked Sister Margaret, the head caretaker, why didn't she come back? She looked at me for a long time and said softly, "Sometimes love isn't strong enough to win against life, Daniel." I didn't understand it then, but those words never left me. When I turned 13, I finally stopped asking, not because I stopped caring, but because hope had started to hurt more than truth. Still, every night before bed, I'd whisper, "Good night, Mom," to that same window, as if somewhere, somehow, she could still hear me. The years blurred together after that. By 16, I was helping the younger kids with their homework, fixing broken toys, reading bedtime stories. Maybe because I knew what it felt like to need someone who never came, and I didn't want them to feel that way. That's when Sister Margaret said something that changed everything. "You have a gift, Daniel. You make people feel like they're not alone." I didn't realize it then, but that was the moment my life began to shift, from waiting for love to giving it. And even though I didn't know it yet, that window, the one I used to sit by, would one day become my mirror. Because through it, I'd learn who I really was. But that lesson, that came much later. The day I turned 18, the gate of St. Mary's closed behind me. No balloons, no celebration. Just a small paper bag with my clothes and Sister Margaret's trembling hand on my shoulder. She smiled through tears and said, "Go make the world better, Daniel. That's how you thank it." The world outside felt too big. The air smelled different, like freedom and fear mixed together. For 12 years, I'd lived in the same small world. Now I stood in a city that didn't even know my name. I found a room in a rundown neighborhood, a creaky apartment above a laundromat. At night, I could hear the machines humming below me, like the orphanage bells I grew up with. It was strange, but somehow comforting. I took every job I could, washing dishes, unloading trucks, cleaning floors. The hours were long, the pay short, but I never complained, because for the first time, I wasn't waiting anymore. I was living. Still, the nights were hard. There were days when I'd come home too tired to eat, and I'd sit by my window again, different window, same boy, and wonder if anyone out there still thought of me. Sometimes I'd see mothers walking their kids to school, and it would sting, not because I envied them, but because I wished I'd known what that kind of love felt like. One winter, I lost my job at the diner. The manager said he couldn't afford extra help. I remember standing outside in the snow, watching people rush by, and realizing how invisible I really was. I slept in shelters, sometimes on benches when there was no room. One night, while trying to stay warm under a flickering streetlight, an older man sat next to me. He looked at me and said, "You're too young to be here, son." I laughed. Where else would I go? He smiled sadly. Forward. That one word stayed with me. Forward. It became a promise. Every time life knocked me down, I whispered it to myself. Forward. Forward. Always forward. I started volunteering at a community center, mostly just helping serve food to kids. They reminded me of myself. Quiet eyes, tired smiles, pretending they didn't need anyone. One of them, a boy named Luis, once asked me, "Why do you help us if no one helped you?" I didn't know what to say. But that night I realized helping them was my way of helping the boy I used to be. Then one day, a woman from a local nonprofit noticed me there. She said, "You have a way with these kids, Daniel. Ever thought of doing this for real?" I didn't even know what she meant. She handed me a pamphlet for a social work program at a nearby college. "Apply," she said. "You'd be great." I laughed at first. College? Me? But something about the way she said it made me think maybe I could. So I did. I applied. With nothing but a borrowed suit, an old laptop, and a personal essay that began with one line. I grew up waiting by a window that never opened. 2 weeks later, I got the letter. Accepted. Scholarship included. That night, I didn't cry. I just stood by the window again. And for the first time, I didn't look out. I looked up. The boy who once waited for someone to save him was about to learn how to save others. College was nothing like I imagined. Everyone around me seemed to belong, to families, to circles of friends, to something. And me? I just belonged to survival. The first week, I barely spoke to anyone. The professors used words I'd never heard before. The students carried laptops I could never afford. I worked nights at a grocery store, slept 4 hours a day, and sometimes went to class hungry. But every morning, when I looked in the mirror, I whispered, "Forward." That one word kept me going. There was one class, Psychology of Childhood Trauma. The first time I sat there listening to the professor talk about how children carry invisible wounds into adulthood, I felt like he was talking about me. The lecture hit too close. I almost walked out. But then he said something that made me stay. Sometimes the people who've been hurt the most become the ones who heal others best. That day, I wrote down a note in my notebook. I will turn my pain into purpose. That became my mission. One afternoon, I was assigned to do volunteer hours at a local youth shelter, a place that took in homeless teenagers. The smell of soup, the laughter echoing in narrow halls, it all reminded me of St. Mary's. The kids there had the same lost eyes I once had. One boy, Marcus, reminded me most of myself. He was quiet, angry, always sitting near the window. The first day I tried to talk to him, he said, "You wouldn't understand." I smiled and said, "Try me." He didn't answer. But the next day, he did. Little by little, he told me his story. A father in prison, a mother addicted, and a childhood spent running from one foster home to another. Every word he said felt like an echo of my own past. That night, I couldn't sleep. I realized this was the reason I'd survived, to be the person I once needed. For the first time in years, my heart felt full. College didn't get easier. I still worked nights, still struggled, but I had a reason now. Every time I wanted to give up, I thought of Marcus and all the kids waiting by their own windows. Senior year, I gave a presentation about emotional resilience in youth. When I finished, the professor said, "Daniel, have you ever thought about speaking publicly? You have something people need to hear." Me? A speaker? The same boy who used to stutter when asked to read in class? But maybe she was right, because that night I stood in front of a mirror, imagining an audience in front of me, and said out loud, "My name is Daniel Brooks, and I am not my past. I am what I chose to become." It wasn't perfect. I stumbled over my words. But for the first time, I heard my own voice not as a whisper, but as a promise. Graduation day came faster than I expected. No family in the crowd, no camera waiting to take my picture, just a quiet seat in the back and a borrowed cap and gown. But when my name was called and I walked across that stage, it felt like the whole world was clapping. Maybe not for me, but for that 6-year-old boy who never stopped believing he could be more. And somewhere deep inside, I knew my story was only beginning. 10 years after graduation, I stood in front of a building with peeling paint and broken windows. It was St. Mary's Orphanage, the place where my story began. The government had shut it down years ago. The halls were empty now, dust floating through the sunlight like memories that refused to die. I walked through the corridors slowly, each step echoing like the footsteps of the boy I used to be. There, by the window where I once waited every night, I stopped. The glass was cracked, but I could still see my reflection. Older, tired, but whole. I whispered, "I made it." And for a moment, I swear I could feel her hand on my shoulder again, my mother's, soft and trembling like the day she left. After that visit, I founded the Second Window Foundation, a nonprofit for kids growing up without parents. We provided shelter, education, therapy, and, most importantly, hope. The kind I once waited for. The first few years were hard. Funding was tight, paperwork endless, but every time I wanted to quit, I remembered Marcus, Lewis, and the boy in the window. I wasn't doing this for myself anymore. I was doing it for them. One evening, after giving a speech at a youth conference, a woman approached me backstage. Her face was lined with time, but her eyes, they were the same soft green I'd seen every night in my dreams. "Daniel?" she whispered. I froze. The air left my lungs. No sound came out. She stepped closer, tears spilling down her cheeks. She said, "I've been looking for you for years. I got clean. I tried to find you, but they told me you were gone." I couldn't move. My heart felt like it had waited a lifetime for that moment. She reached out a shaking hand. "Can you forgive me?" I took her hand. It was cold, fragile, human. I didn't say anything, just nodded, because forgiveness didn't need words. We sat there for hours, talking about everything and nothing. The lost years, the pain, the healing. And when she finally smiled, I realized something I'd never understood before. Forgiveness isn't about changing the past, it's about freeing the future. Months later, she began volunteering at my foundation. Watching her read stories to children who had no one, it felt like the universe had tied the circle closed. Now, when I speak to young people, I tell them my story not to make them sad, but to remind them, no matter how dark your beginning, you have the power to write your own ending. I still visit that old orphanage sometimes. The walls are cracked, the rooms silent, but I stand by that same window, close my eyes, and whisper, "Thank you." Because that boy who once waited there, he taught me everything I needed to know about hope. And if anyone ever asks me who I am, I tell them, I am the boy who stopped waiting and started building doors.